What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late-night talk show expecting a normal conversation, only to be blindsided by a host who treats him like a punching bag? In just 34 seconds, Stephen Colbert would say something so outrageous, so completely out of line, that it would lead to the most shocking guest walkout in late-night television history. Samuel L. Jackson is a legend. There is no other way to put it. The man has been in over 150 films. He has worked with every major director you can think of. He has earned the respect of millions of fans around the world. And when he agreed to appear on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, everyone expected it to be fun, lighthearted, and entertaining. Nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. The interview started normally enough. Samuel walked out onto the stage with that signature cool confidence he always has. The audience went wild. They were cheering, clapping, absolutely thrilled to see him. He sat down in the guest chair, smiled at the crowd, and seemed ready for a good conversation. Stephen Colbert greeted him with a handshake and a smile. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed professional. But within minutes, you could feel something was off. There was a tension in the air that nobody expected. Stephen started the interview by bringing up Samuel's recent movies, which is standard talk show procedure. But the way he was asking the questions felt different. There was an edge to his voice, a smirk on his face that suggested he was not interested in having a real conversation. He seemed more interested in making jokes at Samuel's expense. Samuel answered the first few questions politely. He talked about his latest project, about working with the director, about the experience on set. He was being a professional. He was doing exactly what a guest is supposed to do on a talk show. But Stephen kept interrupting him. Every time Samuel tried to finish a thought, Stephen would cut him off with a sarcastic comment or a joke that felt more mean-spirited than funny. The audience laughed at first, because that is what audiences do. They laugh when the host makes a joke. But you could tell some people in the crowd were starting to feel uncomfortable. Samuel's expression changed too. The smile on his face started to fade. His answers became shorter. He was clearly not enjoying himself anymore. Then Stephen brought up Samuel's age. He made a comment about how Samuel had been acting for so long that he must be tired. He said it in a joking way, but there was an insult buried in there. Samuel did not laugh. He looked directly at Stephen and said, "I am not tired. I love what I do, and I am still doing it better than most people half my age." The audience cheered for that response. They were on Samuel's side, but Stephen did not seem to like being challenged. Instead of moving on to a different topic, he doubled down. He started making more comments about Samuel's age, about how Hollywood is always looking for younger actors, about how maybe it was time for Samuel to think about retirement. The whole thing was bizarre. This was supposed to be a fun interview, but Stephen was turning it into something hostile. Samuel stayed calm. He is a professional after all. He has dealt with difficult interviews before, but you could see the frustration building. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and gave Stephen a look that said he was not amused. "Why are you so obsessed with my age?" Samuel asked. "You keep bringing it up like it is some kind of problem." "I'm here to talk about my work, not to be disrespected on national television." Stephen laughed it off. He tried to play it like Samuel was being too sensitive, like it was all just part of the show, but the audience was not laughing anymore. They could tell this was not a bit. This was real tension. Samuel was genuinely upset, and Stephen was not backing down. Then Stephen made the biggest mistake of the night. He looked at Samuel and said, "You know, for someone who plays tough guys in movies, you sure are sensitive in real life." The audience gasped. You could hear the shock in the room. That was not a joke. That was a direct insult, and Samuel was done. He sat there for a moment, just staring at Stephen. The silence was deafening. Nobody knew what was going to happen next. Then Samuel uncrossed his arms, leaned forward, and spoke in that calm, controlled voice he is famous for. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I have been doing this for decades. I have been interviewed by everyone. I have been on every talk show. And I have never, not once, been disrespected the way you are disrespecting me right now." Stephen tried to laugh it off again. He said something about how it was all in good fun, how Samuel needed to relax. But Samuel was not having it. "This is not fun," Samuel said. "You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead you have spent the entire time trying to make me look bad. You have insulted my age, you have questioned my relevance, and now you are calling me sensitive? That is not how you treat a guest." The audience was completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. Stephen looked uncomfortable for the first time all night. He tried to change the subject, but Samuel cut him off. "No," Samuel said. "We are not moving on. You need to understand something. "I do not need to be here. I am here because I thought it would be a good conversation, but you have turned this into something ugly, and I am not going to sit here and let you disrespect me." Stephen finally seemed to realize he had gone too far. He tried to apologize, but it came across as insincere. He said something about how he was just trying to be funny, how he did not mean any harm, but Samuel was already standing up. "I think we are done here," Samuel said. He unclipped his microphone, handed it to one of the producers, and started walking off the stage. The audience did not know how to react. Some people started clapping, showing their support for Samuel. Others just sat there in shock. Stephen called after him, trying to get him to come back. But Samuel kept walking. He did not look back. He did not wave. He just walked straight off the set and disappeared backstage. Stephen was left sitting there alone. He tried to make a joke about it, tried to play it off like it was no big deal, but you could tell he was rattled. The whole studio felt different. The energy was gone. What was supposed to be a fun, entertaining interview had turned into a complete disaster, and it was entirely Stephen's fault. Before we get to what happened in those final moments before Samuel left, let's talk about what led up to this point. Because this was not just about one bad interview. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been building for the entire segment. From the very beginning, Stephen seemed determined to make Samuel the butt of every joke. He interrupted him constantly. He did not let Samuel finish his answers. He kept steering the conversation back to topics that made Samuel uncomfortable. And every time Samuel tried to redirect the conversation to something positive, Stephen would find a way to turn it negative. At one point, Stephen brought up a movie Samuel had done years ago, a film that was not well received by critics. He made a comment about how it was one of Samuel's worst performances. Samuel handled it with grace. He said that not every movie can be a hit, that he was still proud of the work he did on that film. But Stephen would not let it go. He kept bringing it up, kept making jokes about it, kept trying to embarrass Samuel in front of the audience. Samuel tried to laugh it off at first. He is used to people making jokes about his movies. He has done so many films over his career that not all of them are going to be classics. But there is a difference between lighthearted, teasing, and outright mockery. And Stephen had crossed that line. The audience could feel it too. The laughter became more forced as the interview went on. People were not sure if they should be laughing or not. They could tell Samuel was not enjoying himself, and that made them uncomfortable. But Stephen kept pushing. He seemed to think that if he just kept making jokes, eventually everyone would loosen up and it would all be fine. But that is not what happened. Instead, the tension just kept building. Samuel's body language changed. He stopped smiling. He stopped leaning forward in his chair. He started giving shorter, more clipped answers. He was clearly trying to get through the interview as quickly as possible, but Stephen seemed oblivious to all of this. Or maybe he just did not care. Then came the comment about Samuel being sensitive. That was the breaking point. Because up until that moment, Samuel had been trying to keep things professional. He had been trying to rise above Stephen's behavior. But when Stephen insulted him directly, when he questioned Samuel's character in front of millions of viewers, that was too much. Samuel's response was perfect. He did not yell. He did not curse. He did not lose his temper. He simply stated the facts. He explained in clear and direct terms why Stephen's behavior was unacceptable. And then he left. He did not storm off in a rage. He did not make a scene. He just calmly removed his microphone and walked away. And that made it even more powerful, because Samuel leaving was not about throwing a tantrum. It was about self-respect. It was about standing up for himself when someone was treating him poorly. And the audience understood that. That is why some of them clapped as he walked off. They respected him for refusing to tolerate disrespect. Now, let's talk about the moment right before Samuel stood up to leave, because this is where you could see everything shift. Stephen had just made the comment about Samuel being sensitive. Samuel sat there, looking at Stephen with this expression that was part disbelief, part disappointment. You could tell he was processing what had just happened. He was giving Stephen one last chance to make it right. And Stephen could have fixed it. He could have given a genuine apology right then and there. He could have said, "You know what? I am sorry. I crossed a line. Let's start over." If he had done that, maybe Samuel would have stayed. Maybe they could have salvaged the interview. But Stephen did not do that. Instead, he tried to make it seem like Samuel was overreacting. He tried to make it seem like Samuel was the problem. That was the final straw. Samuel's face changed. The disappointment turned into determination. He knew he was not going to get a real apology from Stephen. He knew that staying would just mean enduring more disrespect. So he made the decision to leave. But before he stood up, he said one more thing. He looked directly at Stephen and said, "You know what your problem is? You think that because you have a talk show, you can treat people however you want. You think that being funny gives you permission to be cruel, but it does not. And one day, you are going to do this to the wrong person, and it is going to cost you everything. Those words hung in the air. The audience was completely silent. Steven's face went pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. And that is when Samuel stood up. That is when he unclipped his microphone. That is when he walked off the set without looking back. The camera stayed on Steven for a few more seconds. You could see him trying to figure out what to do. He looked at the audience, then at the cameras, then back at the empty chair where Samuel had been sitting. He tried to make a joke about it. He said something like, "Well, that was unexpected," with a nervous laugh. But nobody laughed with him. The audience just stared. One of the producers came out onto the stage and whispered something in Steven's ear. Steven nodded, then turned back to the camera and said they were going to take a commercial break. The screen cut to black. And that was it. That was how the interview ended, with an empty chair, an uncomfortable silence, and a host who had just learned a very hard lesson about respect. What makes this whole situation even more remarkable is how Samuel handled it. He could have exploded. He could have yelled at Steven in front of everyone. He could have made a huge scene, but he did not. He stayed calm and composed the entire time. Even when he was clearly angry, even when he had every right to lose his temper, he maintained his dignity. And that is what made his exit so powerful. Because Samuel did not need to yell to make his point. His words were enough. His actions were enough. By simply standing up and walking away, he showed Steven and everyone watching that he would not tolerate being disrespected. He showed that no amount of fame or success means you have to put up with someone treating you badly. And he showed that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remove yourself from a toxic situation. The audience's reaction said it all. The people who clapped as Samuel walked off were not applauding because they enjoyed the drama. They were applauding because they respected what Samuel did. They understood that he was standing up for himself. They understood that Steven had gone too far, and they supported Samuel's decision to leave. Think about how rare that is. Usually, when there is conflict on a talk show, the audience sides with the host. The host is the one they came to see. The host is the one they love. But in this case, the audience sided with the guest. They sided with Samuel because it was obvious that he was in the right. It was obvious that Steven had been the aggressor, and they were not going to pretend otherwise just because Steven was the one with the microphone. Let's go back and look at some of the specific things Steven said during the interview, because it is important to understand just how bad it got. Early on, when Samuel was talking about his latest film, Steven interrupted him and said, "Is this another one of those movies where you just show up, say a few lines, and collect a paycheck?" The audience laughed nervously, but Samuel's smile faded. He said, "No, actually, I put a lot of work into this role. I care about every project I do." Steven did not apologize. He just moved on to the next question. But the damage was done. He had already planted the idea that Samuel was just phoning it in, that he did not care about his work, and that was completely unfair. Anyone who knows anything about Samuel L. Jackson knows that he is one of the hardest working actors in Hollywood. He does not just show up and collect a paycheck. He brings energy and commitment to every role. Then there was the comment about younger actors. Steven said something like, "Hollywood is always looking for the next big thing. Do you ever worry that you are becoming irrelevant?" It was such a rude question. Samuel had every right to be offended, but he handled it professionally. He said, "I do not worry about that at all. I have been in this industry long enough to know that talent and hard work speak for themselves. I am not worried about being replaced." But Steven would not drop it. He kept pushing, kept making comments about age and relevance. It was like he was trying to get a reaction out of Samuel, like he wanted Samuel to get angry so it would make for more dramatic television. But that is not how you treat a guest. That is not how you conduct an interview, and eventually, it backfired on him. The worst part is that Steven seemed to think he was being clever. He seemed to think that his sarcastic comments and pointed questions were making for good television. But they were not. They were just making everyone uncomfortable. The audience did not want to see Samuel being torn down. They wanted to see him celebrated. They wanted to hear interesting stories about his career, about his experiences, about the amazing work he has done. But Steven was more interested in scoring cheap points than having a meaningful conversation. And that brings us to the core issue here. This was not just about one bad interview. This was about a fundamental misunderstanding of what a talk show should be. A talk show is supposed to be a platform where guests can share their stories, promote their work, and connect with the audience. It is not supposed to be a platform for the host to show off at the guest's expense. It is not supposed to be a place where guests are made to feel small or disrespected. Steven forgot that, or maybe he never understood it in the first place. He seemed to think that being edgy and provocative was more important than being respectful. He seemed to think that making the audience laugh was more important than making the guests feel comfortable. But he was wrong. And Samuel showed him exactly how wrong he was. When Samuel walked off that stage, he was not just making a statement about that one interview. He was making a statement about how people should be treated. He was saying that respect matters. He was saying that dignity matters. He was saying that no one, no matter how famous or successful, should have to sit there and be insulted on national television. And the beautiful thing is that Samuel did not need to explain any of that. His actions spoke for themselves. Everyone watching understood exactly what was happening. They understood that Stephen had crossed a line. They understood that Samuel was standing up for himself. And they understood that Samuel was right to leave. The moment when Samuel handed his microphone to the producer was particularly striking. It was such a simple gesture, but it said so much. It said that he was done. It said that he was not going to participate in this anymore. It said that he had more self-respect than to sit there and be treated like that. And it said that Stephen had lost a guest who could have made for an incredible interview if only he had shown some basic respect. As Samuel walked off the stage, you could see the realization dawning on Stephen's face. He finally understood that he had messed up. He finally understood that his behavior had consequences. But it was too late. Samuel was already gone, and the damage was done. The audience sat there in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something unprecedented. They had just seen one of the biggest stars in Hollywood walk off a major talk show because the host had been so disrespectful, and they did not know what to do. Should they clap? Should they boo? Should they just sit there quietly? In the end, some did clap, showing their support for Samuel. And that said everything about who the real hero of this story was. Stephen tried to recover. He tried to make jokes, tried to act like everything was fine. But you could see the panic in his eyes. He knew he had just made a huge mistake. He knew that this was going to be the thing people remembered. Not the funny bits, not the clever questions, but the moment when Samuel L. Jackson walked off his show because Stephen had been too arrogant and too disrespectful to know when to stop. The producers rushed to cut to commercial. They needed time to figure out what to do next. The show could not just end there. They had to fill the rest of the time somehow, but everyone knew that nothing they did after that moment would matter. The interview with Samuel was supposed to be the highlight of the show, and now it was just a disaster. What Stephen failed to understand is that respect is not optional. It is not something you can choose to give or withhold based on what you think will make for better television. Respect is fundamental. It is the bare minimum you owe to another human being, especially someone you have invited onto your show. And when you fail to show respect, you lose something far more valuable than ratings. You lose credibility, you lose trust, and you lose the respect of your audience. Samuel understood this. That is why he handled the situation the way he did. He could have fought back with insults. He could have tried to embarrass Stephen the way Stephen had tried to embarrass him. But he did not. He simply stated his boundaries, explained why Stephen's behavior was unacceptable, and then removed himself from the situation. That takes maturity. That takes wisdom. That takes confidence. And Samuel had all three. The fact that this all happened on live television made it even more impactful. There was no editing, no chance for anyone to smooth things over or make it look better than it was. Everyone saw exactly what happened. They saw Stephen's disrespect. They saw Samuel's patience wearing thin. They saw the moment when Samuel decided he had had enough, and they saw him walk away with his head held high. This is the kind of moment that defines people. It shows who they really are when things get difficult. And what it showed about Samuel is that he is a man who knows his worth. He is not willing to compromise his dignity for anyone or anything. He is not willing to sit there and be insulted just because someone has a television show. He has standards. He has boundaries. And he is willing to enforce them, even if it means walking away from an interview that millions of people are watching. Stephen, on the other hand, showed that he values humor and entertainment over respect and decency. He showed that he is willing to make his guests uncomfortable if he thinks it will get a laugh. He showed that he does not understand the responsibility that comes with having a platform, and he showed that he has a lot to learn about how to treat people. The empty chair that Samuel left behind became a symbol. It was a symbol of what happens when you disrespect someone who knows their worth. It was a symbol of the consequences of arrogance. It was a symbol of the power of standing up for yourself. And it was a reminder to everyone watching that respect is not negotiable. As the camera lingered on that empty chair during the commercial break transition, you could feel the weight of what had just happened. This was not just another talk show moment. This was not just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a statement. This was a lesson. And this was a moment that would be talked about for a long time to come. Samuel L. Jackson walked off that stage, and in doing so, he walked into legend. He showed the world that no matter how big the platform, no matter how famous the host, no matter how many cameras are watching, some things are more important than the show, and respect is one of them.